G'day disciple makers. Who is your target people group? When I came across news of David Watson's work in India, I thought how wonderful it would be to find someone who had some personal connection with Watson and some training materials. And it just so happens that within a few months I found exactly that. I went through a training course on DMM principles along with my wife and children, and I had a whole new approach to evangelism. I used to target, in former times, an individual with a presentation. That's all I knew how to do. Now, I take time to pray and ask God for a person of peace, as in Luke chapter 10 verse 7, in order to open a door to a community or a nationality. It seemed as if God was keen to answer that prayer. One time after praying one evening, a man of that nationality walked up to me the next day and said, "Arnold, I like you and I want to be your friend." Similar things have happened on multiple other occasions. When the Lord commanded us to disciple nations in Matthew chapter 28, the Greek word there is ethne, meaning tribe, group, nationality. It can also be used for flock, herd, or mob. So when you're casting around and praying about obeying the Great Commission and who to approach, it could be just about any group, club, town, language, or community anywhere near you. Actually, I do remember being pretty focused many years ago, before all this. During the Cold War, in the 1980s, the contrast looked very stark to me, and I had this strong desire to win over communists. But they seemed to be well hidden. I just couldn't find any anywhere. I never met any in suburban Australia, and so I would go along to public demonstrations and protests by the International Socialists, and I would preach there to the assembled protesters. So I did get to meet them there. My approach back then was a kind of adapted version of the Evangelism Explosion presentation, or again the Glad Tidings School of Evangelism. Basically a recounting of the substitutionary atonement and then making the contrast between mental assent and the reliance of faith, all in the shortest possible time frame. For 30 years it puzzled me that I had no results and that I knew nobody that had any results. Actually, I did see a few gifted individuals in all that time who could introduce another person to church. But curiously, they didn't make any kind of presentation to get that result. At my workplace, there are a wide variety of nationalities, and for the last 7 years I've been experimenting and learning a whole new approach, one more closely tied to the biblical pattern. I find some receptive person, befriend them, and let them gather a group to hear from me. On one occasion, a man from a different religion called a Christmas party for a dozen others from our workplace. He made a speech, and then he turned to me and asked me to tell them about the true meaning of Christmas. I'm learning. I remember praying early one morning about who to approach, and I did notice that the first verses in the Sermon on the Mount were about who the good news is for. The Beatitudes are a summing up of the audience that Jesus had in mind. Let's read this in Matthew chapter 5. I'll read 11 verses here. When he saw the crowds, he went up on the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him. Then he began to teach them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the humble, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. You are blessed when they insult you and persecute you and falsely say every kind of evil against you because of me. Be glad and rejoice, because your reward is great in heaven, for that is how they persecuted the prophets who were before you." What do you think? It looks to me that Jesus is sharing with us a soft spot that he has for certain groups. And he does this more than once. His parable of the sheep and the goats has a similar description. Matthew 25 verse 44 says, "Then they too will answer, 'Lord, when did we see you hungry, or thirsty, or a stranger, or without clothes, or sick, or in prison and not help you?'" When we're thinking about who to reach out to with the good news, I think it's good to have these things in mind. Here's another thing that stood out to me as I was browsing through the Bible looking for insights about reaching groups. This passage in 1 Corinthians chapter 9 and verses 19 to 23. "Although I am free from all and not anyone's slave, I have made myself a slave to everyone in order to win more people. To the Jews I became like a Jew, to win Jews. To those under the law, like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law, to win those under the law. To those who are without the law, like one without the law, although I am not without the law, without God's law, but under the law of Christ, in order to win those without the law. To the weak I became weak, in order to win the weak. I have become all things to all people, so that I may, by every possible means, save some. Now I do all this because of the gospel, so that I may share in the blessings." I don't know about you, but as the culture wars have heated up since the 1960s, many Christians have rightly become more clearly antagonistic to liberalism and to the progress of the revolution in ethics. The people who lead the opposition to traditional family values clearly need the gospel, and yet we, the custodians of the good news, are loudly castigating their position on our social media profiles and in every possible arena. The Apostle Paul in this passage is saying that he has a way of identifying with people that he disagrees with in order to win more people. He tells us why: for the blessings. There is favour from God in that approach. Presumably, there's a correction that takes place later on. You know the saying, God loves you just the way that you are, but loves you too much to let you stay that way. And I'm not saying that it's wrong to advocate for a godly position, but there is a time to refrain, according to the apostle here, for a specific purpose. What people groups are you going to target? There are plenty of people groups all around us where we already live. Will they only be the ones that you already agree with? How are you going to approach that people group? Do you want to share in the blessings? I hope you'll pray with me as the Lord taught us. Pray therefore the Lord of the harvest that he would send out labourers into his harvest. See you next time.